When you finally decide to let someone go, something profound happens within your soul, something far deeper than the mind can decode or language can fully hold. It is not simply the end of a relationship nor the fading of a memory. It is a spiritual initiation. Letting go is the moment your inner world recognizes a truth your outer world resisted. It is the quiet realization that holding on has become heavier than releasing. And in that moment of surrender, your spirit begins doing work your conscious self may not yet understand. First, a part of your identity dissolves. Every person we allow close to us becomes woven into the architecture of who we believe we are. Their presence forms rooms, echoes, shadows, and light within us. So when you release them, the structure must break. And though breaking feels like loss, it is actually the beginning of reformation. Then comes the clearing. Your spirit sweeps out the emotional debris, old narratives, expired hopes, and the versions of you that survived instead of lived. This clearing is why letting go feels like emptiness at first. Spiritually, emptiness is not abandonment, it is preparation. It is space for what is meant to come. Next, your intuition becomes louder. As attachments loosen, clarity rises. You start hearing yourself again. You realize the difference between loneliness and alignment, between desire and destiny. Your soul whispers truths you avoided. You were shrinking. You were repeating a cycle. You were clinging to potential instead of reality. And then something extraordinary happens. You begin reclaiming your energy. The emotional investment you once poured into someone else returns back home. You start remembering the parts of you that dimmed. You rediscover your own power. Letting someone go initiates a spiritual rebirth, not because leaving them makes you stronger, but because choosing yourself does. Because the moment you release what was never meant to stay, you step into the timeline that was always meant for you. You don't let go to punish them. You let go to return to yourself. And on the other side of this release, you will not be the same because you finally met the version of you that was waiting to be free. Letting go is a spiritual initiation because it marks the moment your soul steps into a higher state of awareness, even if your mind resists it. It is not simply the act of releasing a person, a memory, or a hope. It is the internal realization that clinging is no longer compatible with who you are becoming. This initiation begins quietly, often disguised as exhaustion, confusion, or emotional heaviness. But beneath those surface feelings is a deeper truth. Your spirit is trying to guide you toward freedom, authenticity, and alignment. When you finally loosen your grip, it feels like a fall at first, but what is actually happening is an ascent. The initiation starts with discomfort because your ego believes that holding on equals safety. It equates the familiar with security, even when the familiar is hurting you. Your spirit, however, knows that growth rarely occurs in comfort, so the tension you feel before letting go is a sign that your inner world is preparing to shift. It is the friction between who you were and who you are becoming. This spiritual friction is necessary. It shakes loose the attachments that no longer serve your evolution. As you enter the state of letting go, your perception starts changing. You begin to see the deeper patterns, the cycles, the emotional loops that kept you tethered. You recognize the ways you abandoned yourself to keep someone else close. You notice how much energy you spent trying to hold on to something misaligned. These realizations are not punishments, they are awakenings. They mark the beginning of inner truth taking precedence over desire, illusion, or fear. This initiation also reveals how interconnected your emotional and spiritual bodies are. When you release something or someone, the emotional pull weakens, and in that space, spiritual clarity rises. You begin to sense the difference between attachment and connection, between love and dependency, between destiny and habit. You realize that what you called love may have been a longing, a projection, or a comfort rooted in old wounds. And as these distinctions become clearer, your spirit begins to reclaim authority over your life. Letting go also initiates an inner purification process. It brings old wounds to the surface, not to break you, but to heal you. Pain becomes a teacher. Silence becomes a mirror. You start hearing the parts of yourself you once silenced, your intuition, your boundaries, your needs, your truth. Each time you choose to release instead of cling, you strengthen your connection to your own essence. And slowly you begin to realize that letting go is not loss, it is liberation. Through this spiritual initiation, your energy begins to reorganize itself. The parts of you that were scattered return. The power you invested in someone else comes back home. You feel a shift, not sudden but gradual, like a soft dawn after a long night. You understand that letting go is not the end of a story, it is the beginning of your return to yourself. A part of your identity dissolves when you let someone go, because every meaningful connection you form becomes woven into the structure of who you believe you are. People do not simply enter your life, they enter your psyche, they shape your habits, influence your emotional responses, and occupy space in your internal world. When you release someone who once held importance, you are not just removing a person from your life, you are dismantling an internal architecture that was built around them. This dissolution feels like loss, not because the person is gone, but because a version of you that existed with them is fading too. This internal unraveling can feel disorienting. Your mind searches for familiar patterns, rituals, and emotional anchors that no longer exist. You might reach for memories, routines, or responses that once made sense but now feel empty. That emptiness is the echo of the identity that is dissolving. It is uncomfortable because humans often cling to identity as if it is fixed, but it is fluid, shaped constantly by relationships, environments, and emotional experiences. When a relationship ends or someone departs, the part of your identity that was built around them cannot survive without their presence, so it falls away. As this identity dissolves, your internal narrative begins to shift. The story you once told yourself about who you were with them, what you meant to them, what role you played, begins to unravel. This can trigger confusion or grief because stories are powerful, they give meaning, structure, and purpose to your emotional world. When the story collapses, the meaning built around it collapses too. But this collapse is essential. It clears the illusions, attachments, and fantasies that kept you tied to an outdated version of yourself. This dissolution also exposes parts of you that were buried beneath the identity tied to that person. You start to notice the compromises you made, the traits you dimmed, the needs you ignored, and the dreams you postponed. You begin to see how much of your identity was shaped not by who you genuinely were, but by who they needed you to be, or who you believed they wanted you to be. That realization may sting, but it is a powerful awakening. When a constructed identity dissolves, your authentic self begins to rise. The process is painful because identity is deeply rooted in attachment. When the attachment breaks, so does the identity linked to it. You might feel like you don't recognize yourself, as if you're floating between who you were and who you are becoming. This in-between state is spiritually significant. It is the void where transformation happens. The dissolution is not destruction, it is refinement. It is your inner world making space for a truer, freer, more aligned version of you to emerge. With time, as the old identity fades, a new sense of self begins to take shape, one not built on attachment but on authenticity. And though you may feel temporarily unanchored, you are actually moving closer to the version of yourself that was waiting beneath all along. Your inner world clears old emotional debris when you let someone go, because the attachment you once carried acted like a container that held memories, hopes, disappointments, fears, and unprocessed feelings all in one place. As long as you held on to that person, you held on to the emotional residue connected to them. When the connection breaks, your inner world finally gets a chance to sweep through the spaces that were previously blocked by attachment. This clearing does not happen gently at first. It often comes through emotional waves, sadness, relief, anger, nostalgia, confusion, surfacing one after another. These waves are not setbacks, they are signals that your inner landscape is reorganizing itself, releasing what no longer needs to be carried. Every relationship leaves behind emotional imprints, and when you let someone go, those imprints begin to dissolve. The memories you held tightly start to lose their grip. the emotional weight you carried begins to lighten. You may find yourself revisiting old situations, replaying conversations, or suddenly remembering things you thought you had forgotten. This resurfacing is part of the clearing. Your psyche brings old emotional debris to the surface so it can finally be acknowledged, felt, and released. It is not punishment, it is purification. Your inner world refuses to keep holding what has been silently draining you. During this clearing, your heart goes through its own detox. Attachment tends to accumulate emotional clutter, unmet expectations, unspoken resentments, suppressed needs, and emotional compromises. Letting go exposes these unseen layers. You begin to see where you overextended your energy, where you settled, where you silenced yourself, and where you hoped someone would change. These realizations might feel heavy, but they are a form of inner cleansing. Awareness dissolves stagnation. The moment you see the emotional residue clearly, it loses its power over you. As your inner world clears, you may also experience a shift in self-perception. Emotional debris often fogs your ability to see your worth, your boundaries, and your truth. You may have been carrying beliefs that came from someone else's behavior, believing you weren't enough, believing you had to earn love, believing you had to diminish yourself to keep peace. When the emotional clutter lifts, these beliefs begin to fall apart as well. You start reconnecting with the parts of you that were buried under emotional noise. Your inner world becomes quieter, more spacious, and more receptive to your own voice. This clearing process creates room for new emotional patterns to form. The energy you once devoted to holding on to someone begins to flow back into your own system. You gain emotional bandwidth to focus on your growth, your healing, your desires, and your future. What once felt like emptiness now becomes sacred space. This space invites clarity, creativity, intuition, and self-love. The emotional debris that clouded your decisions is gone, and in its place rises a renewed sense of self-awareness. Your inner world clears old emotional debris so that you can move forward lighter, clearer, and more aligned. The release is not just about losing someone, it is about reclaiming yourself. It is your spirit reorganizing your emotional reality so that you no longer live with the weight of what has already ended. And in that clearing, you begin to finally feel free. Your intuition becomes stronger when you let someone go because the emotional noise that once clouded your inner voice begins to fade. Attachment acts like a filter, distorting signals, amplifying fear, and muting instincts. When you are deeply connected to someone, especially in a way that is emotionally charged, your intuition often becomes tangled with hopes, fears, projections, and unhealed wounds. You might sense the truth, but you override it. You might feel the misalignment, but you silence it in the name of love or loyalty. The moment you release the attachment, those internal distortions begin to clear, and your intuition regains its natural strength. As the emotional fog lifts, you start hearing yourself again. The inner voice that warned you, guided you, nudged you, or whispered subtle truths becomes louder, clearer, and more grounded. Detoxing from attachment is like cleaning a fogged mirror. You begin to see reality without distortion. You no longer interpret every intuitive signal through the lens of fear of losing someone or the desire to keep the relationship alive. You are no longer negotiating with your inner truth in order to maintain a connection. Instead, your intuition becomes a steady compass, not easily influenced by emotional bias. The strengthening of intuition also comes from the return of your personal energy. When you are attached to someone, especially someone who drains you emotionally or spiritually, your energy becomes fragmented. You give too much, adapt too much, and anticipate too much. This scattered energy makes it difficult to access deep intuitive wisdom because intuition thrives on inner stillness, presence, and clarity. Letting go pulls your energy back into your center. With that return comes a stronger connection to your inner knowing. You also begin to recognize patterns that were previously invisible. Intuition is not only a feeling, it is pattern recognition on a soul level. When you step away from someone, you suddenly understand the dynamics that kept you stuck. You see the reasons you held on, the lessons you were meant to learn, and the red flags you ignored. You see how your spirit tried to protect you long before your mind accepted the truth. This retrospective clarity strengthens your trust in your intuition moving forward. You begin to understand that the gut feeling you dismissed was not anxiety, but guidance. As your intuition strengthens, it becomes easier to discern people, situations, and energies. You can sense when something feels off, even if it looks perfect on the surface. You can feel alignment before you logically understand it. You start recognizing the difference between genuine connection and emotional attachment, between love and longing, between spiritual alignment and familiar wounds. Your decisions become more intentional, more aligned, and less influenced by external validation or emotional impulses. This heightened intuition also reconnects you to your spiritual path. Letting go removes energetic blockages, allowing your spirit to communicate more freely. You feel more guided, more supported, and more aware of synchronicities. You begin trusting life again. You begin trusting yourself again. And that self-trust becomes the foundation for every choice you make moving forward. Your intuition becomes stronger not because you gained something new, but because you removed what was blocking it. The truth was always there. Letting go simply made it louder. You reclaim your energy when you let someone go, because the emotional, mental, and spiritual investment you once poured into them finally begins to return to its source. Every relationship, especially one that carries weight in your heart, becomes a channel through which your energy flows. You give attention, care, worry, hope, effort, and emotional labor. Over time, this becomes an energetic exchange that often continues long after the connection has weakened. Letting go closes that channel. It is the moment your spirit stops leaking energy into a space that no longer nourishes you. At first it may feel like emptiness, but what you are feeling is the absence of constant emotional output. This space is not loneliness, it is energetic restoration. As your energy returns, you begin noticing shifts in your thoughts and emotions. Feelings that once drained you lose their power. Situations that once triggered you no longer hold the same weight. The mental loop you were stuck in, rethinking every moment, imagining what could have been, replaying conversations, begins to loosen its grip. This mental quieting is one of the first signs that your energy is coming home. The mind becomes clearer because it is no longer stretched between hope and reality. You reclaim the mental bandwidth that was consumed by trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Your emotional energy also shifts. When you are attached to someone, part of your emotional field stays tied to their actions, responses, and presence. You feel their distance, their moods, their inconsistency. Emotional attachment creates an energetic bond that makes your feelings overly dependent on theirs. When you let go, that bond begins to dissolve. You stop reacting to their silence. You stop waiting for their validation. You stop bending yourself around their absence. You stop carrying the emotional weight of keeping a dying connection alive. This release allows your emotional energy to stabilize and return to equilibrium. There is also a physical aspect to reclaiming your energy. Exhaustion, heaviness, tension, and even physical fatigue often accompany emotional attachment, especially when the relationship becomes one-sided or draining. When you let someone go, your body begins to relax. It stops bracing for disappointment. It stops holding stress in your chest, shoulders, or stomach. The body senses when the heart stops fighting a losing battle. The tension dissolves because the internal conflict dissolves. This physical relief is your energy recalibrating. Br. Spiritually, reclaiming your energy is a profound homecoming. The parts of you that were scattered, your attention, your longing, your hope, your emotional generosity, start returning. You feel more grounded, more centered, more present. You begin reconnecting with your own needs, desires, and purpose. Energy that was constantly flowing outward begins flowing inward, fueling your growth instead of your attachments. You feel stronger not because you gained something, but because you stopped losing yourself. In this reclaimed energy, you rediscover your power. You remember your worth. You reconnect with your inner self in a way that was impossible while you were pouring everything into someone who could not hold you. Reclaiming your energy is not just a recovery, it is a rebirth. Letting go triggers a spiritual rebirth because it is the moment your soul sheds the weight of what has already completed its purpose in your life. It marks the end of one inner chapter and the quiet beginning of another. When you release someone you once held close, something inside you breaks open, not in destruction, but in transformation. The identity, expectations, and attachments tied to that relationship dissolve, and in their absence, your spirit begins to reassemble itself in a new form. This rebirth is not loud or dramatic. It unfolds slowly and subtly, like dawn spreading across a dark horizon. You may not notice it at first, but deep within, something fundamental has shifted. As you let go, a space opens within you, and that space is the birthplace of rebirth. The emptiness that once felt frightening becomes fertile ground for new awareness, new emotions, and new versions of yourself. For so long your energy was entangled in holding on, in trying to maintain, fix, or preserve what was breaking. When you finally release it, your energy is freed, and your spirit redirects that energy toward reconstruction. You begin to rebuild, not the old life, but a new inner structure aligned with your growth. Letting go is the collapse of old emotional architecture, and rebirth is the construction of a stronger, truer foundation. This transformation begins with a shift in perspective. You start seeing yourself differently. You recognize your resilience, your capacity to survive heartbreak, and your ability to make decisions that honor your well-being. You begin to understand why the universe removed certain people from your path, not to punish you, but to realign you. You see how holding on kept you stagnant, how attachment kept you small, and how release opens doors that could never appear while you were clinging to a version of life that was no longer meant for you. This clarity is part of your spiritual rebirth. It expands your awareness and reconnects you with your intuition. Rebirth also shows up emotionally. You begin to feel lighter, even if grief still lingers. You sense the return of your own energy. You notice that your heartbeat feels different, less burdened, more open. You start to experience moments of peace, moments when you feel guided, moments when you feel that something greater is unfolding in your life. These moments are not coincidences, they are signs of inner renewal. Your spirit is awakening from a long period of emotional fatigue and stepping into a new state of aliveness. As the rebirth deepens, you reconnect with the parts of yourself that were forgotten or neglected. Desires you once silenced begin to rise again. Dreams you postponed re-enter your imagination. Your confidence strengthens. Your vision becomes clearer. You feel more anchored in your own worth and less dependent on external validation. The energy that once tied you to someone else now fuels your transformation. Letting go triggers a spiritual rebirth because it returns you to yourself. It strips away the illusions you once clung to and reveals the truth of who you are becoming. And though the process may be painful, it births a version of you that is stronger, wiser, freer, and more aligned with your soul's path. This rebirth is not the end of love, it is the beginning of self-love. In the end, letting someone go is not about forgetting them, erasing them, or pretending they never mattered. It is about honoring what their presence taught you and accepting that their absence now teaches you even more. It is about recognizing that life moves in cycles, relationships begin, deepen, fracture, and transform, and your soul evolves through each one. You are not meant to stay in the same emotional landscape forever. You are meant to grow, shift, expand, and rise, and sometimes rising requires releasing the hands you once held tightly. Sometimes the universe removes what you cannot walk away from, not to hurt you, but to guide you back to the path that was always meant to be yours. So as you stand at this threshold between what was and what will be, trust the wisdom of your inner world. Trust the clarity that is emerging. Trust the strength that is returning. Trust the version of you that is being born from this release. .br, because you are not losing your way. You are finding it. You are not breaking. You are breaking open. .br, you are not ending. You are beginning. And when you finally step into the new space your spirit has carved for you, you will understand that letting go was not an act of abandonment. It was an act of becoming,